Hi everyone, for the month of May, which is Asian Pacific American Heritage Month, I thought I would create a little series kind of describing my experience growing up Asian American and little pieces of Asian culture. To kick off my series, I thought I would talk about my experience growing up as an adopted Asian. So I'm going to keep my adoption story pretty general since it is pretty personal, but in November 1998, I was born in China under the one-child policy rule. This policy was established in 1979 to help control the population in China. It was modified in the mid-1980s to allow families to have a second child if their first was a daughter. It was abolished in 2015, and it was stated that all families were allowed to have 2 children. So being born under this policy and being a girl, I was put into an orphanage in China. On the other side of the world, my parents had 3 biological kids. My mom always wanted to have 4 kids, but wasn't able to have her own 4th child. So my parents looked into a local agency and went through the whole long process of, background screenings, home visits, everything under the sun that I honestly don't even know their whole process, but they were obviously approved to adopt a child. And so in July 1999, they flew over, took the long journey to China, and adopted me. So that was a short summary of my adoption story, and growing up, my family never strayed away from talking about my adoption or my adoption story. And obviously it would have been a little bit obvious if they didn't ever mention it. I definitely had moments growing up where I wanted to be white, though. I had no real concept of what it meant to be white or anything like that. I just knew that I looked like this and my family looked a little bit different, and I just wanted to be like them. In elementary school, I had a few Asian friends because around my area there are some other agencies, adoption agencies, so most of my Asian friends at school were also adopted. Also growing up, we kept the connection with the families that all went to China together at the same time. Being 22, we all can talk about our identity and the things we've been through and have a little more concept of identity and can comprehend what we have all gone through together. Overall, elementary school was a pretty fun experience. I remember in 1st grade, we did a unit on China and I presented some aspects of it. I forget what parts, but I do remember feeling pretty singled out, and I felt pride in being Asian and I felt pride in being Chinese, but for some reason I felt like really weird about it. Now transitioning to middle school, this is where everything kind of changes. Everyone hits puberty, everyone's gross, just middle school is not the best time. So this is where I was really made aware that I was Asian. Again, when I was younger, I kind of noticed it and felt different, but didn't really know what it meant to be Asian. Elementary school, I had other friends that looked like me, but we didn't ever obviously talk about the concept of race and being Asian and what that meant. But in middle school is when it was really pointed out to me. In middle school, people kind of just group people together naturally because that's what happens when you're like 13, 14. And that never really happened to me before. Again, obviously there were groups, but there's only so many people you can group. In middle school, it was bigger and they were some more Asians, not very many. But you could group Asians together better. So I made an Asian friend pretty early on, and I think I kind of naturally or subconsciously gravitate toward other Asians just because you see someone who resembles you or has certain characteristics, and so you just gravitate towards them. So I remember I was friends with her and people would just comment that we're only friends because we're Asian, and just very surface level. Like, maybe it again subconsciously crossed my mind that I would befriend her because she was Asian, but having other people kind of tell us that's why we're friends, that kind of makes it feel like that it's wrong or that I shouldn't do that. And that pattern kind of continued for me with anyone who I was in a friendship with, anyone who I made any type of relationship with. It was always singled out that they were Asian too, and that's why we were friends. And I felt like I couldn't be friends with someone who was Asian because someone would just always comment on it. And so it's hard to describe to someone who doesn't understand the same kind of feeling, where you try and look for someone who looks like you so you can have somewhat of a similar experience and coming from probably a similar background. High school was pretty similar. I live in a predominantly white area and my high school is about 86% white and about 3 to 4% of that being Asian. So a very small pool of Asian people at my high school. In high school, I felt a little more comfortable being Asian. People were starting to realize that it wasn't as weird to have friends who were the same ethnicity as you, and they didn't necessarily feel like it was necessary to point that out. But in one of my classes, this is just an experience that, you know, jumps out to me. Again, there are probably other repressed memories in high school that I've decided to forget. A bunch of other students from one of my chemistry classes were eating lunch and we were talking about a test or something, and a girl asked what everyone thought of the test, and people said like it was easier, whatever. I said a similar thing, like I said I thought it was easy, and she instantly singled me out and said, that's just because you're Asian. And it was like kind of joking, but like not really. Felt like really completely invalidating, and I just got shut down, and I felt like my feelings weren't heard or my thoughts weren't heard because I was just Asian, and that made me good at chemistry or good at math or whatever it is, which feeds into the model minority stereotype, as we all have heard probably by now. With that stereotype, it completely negates all effort and hard work that someone puts in. It also completely neglects every other Asian person who isn't good at that thing because they might not feel Asian enough, and people will probably comment on the other side that they aren't Asian enough because they aren't good at math. Also in high school, I worked at a Japanese restaurant, and I faced a lot of microaggressions there. Some customers were pretty rude. They would talk to me slowly and act like I didn't understand what they were saying, and especially to my coworkers who had an accent, some were really rude to them and just like acted like they couldn't understand anything they were saying, and that, you know, the server had no idea how to understand English, and just things like that, where just the microaggressions were very prominent during this time. Shifting to college, this is really where I began to feel comfortable with myself and my Asian identity. In my freshman year, I roomed with someone who is Chinese, and I did that on purpose. And again, not because of any really particular reason, but again, just because it's easier to find connections with someone who has similar experiences and backgrounds to you. And so that was important to me, going off to a school where I didn't know that many people. I also made some other Asian friends very easily, and that again was just because that connection, that background that we all had because we were Asian, and at this primarily white institution, it's just easier to find people who you can relate to and talk with. Also during my freshman year, I got a DNA test because I felt ready to figure out if I was anything other than Chinese. I initially had always kind of thought about doing this, and I assumed it would be 100% Chinese, but then kind of when I worked at the Japanese restaurant, the workers there would kind of comment that I could be mixed or something, and I never really thought about that before. I'm going to touch on that a little bit later, but I thought it would be fun to see and just figure it out. So it turns out I am 94% Chinese and 6% Filipino. I don't know if those results are very accurate or what, but that is just what it told me. Now, in my sophomore year, I decided to join the Filipino Student Association, and that is not really due to the 6%, but I really wanted to, you know, find more Asian friends and be more in touch with like an Asian culture. There was a Chinese student association, but a lot of the members are international students, so I just felt like a little bit disconnected from that. So I chose to join FSA, and that decision is probably the best one I made throughout my whole college experience. In the organization, as you could guess, it was mostly Filipino students, but there was also people from different backgrounds, different ethnicities, and it just brought everyone together and focused on, you know, the Filipino culture, Filipino food, family, you know, having fun and just having a really good sense of community. Through this club, I was able to connect to another Asian culture, albeit not Chinese, but I really felt connected and supported through the club. And I've met my like really good friends in this club, and it's a very supportive and loving and just caring group of people, and I'm so glad I joined FSA. So as you can tell, I've had a pretty positive experience being an adopted Asian American. You know, kind of touching back to the adopted thing, there was always questions I had about my birth parents and why I was put up for adoption and just whys and hows and things like that, but unfortunately I don't really have answers for those, and you know, it's just kind of about being more comfortable with how I got here and finding other people who are adopted and having similar experiences. And there's just some things with adoption that I will never really know, and that's fine. But it's just always will be a mystery. And growing up, I think that was a lot harder because I wanted to know all the answers. And you know, you still do, but I've become more comfortable with not knowing. Touching back on the fact that people think I'm mixed, I definitely think my experience is more positive because I look more white. You know, I have some features that are obviously Asian, but you know, my hair is a little bit of a different texture. I don't have a monolid, random things like that that people associate with being Asian, and people thinking that every Asian looks the same, which is not a good thing. You know, and that kind of idea that I don't look Asian or I could be like some Asian, it just kind of goes back to the fact that a lot of people think that all Asians look the same and they all have the same type of features, which isn't true because there are lots and lots of Asian people who all look very different. I've also grown to realize the privilege I've had because of the way I look and the fact that I grew up in a white family. You know, my parents can speak English. English is their first language. They don't have to have, you know, papers translated to them. I don't need to translate anything into their own language. If I'm with my family, no one's really gonna say anything to me. These things are definitely things that I've realized as I've gotten older, and that I definitely have benefited from being in a white family and growing up where I grew up. There are definitely areas that I still have insecurities about growing up whitewashed, or however you want to say, or just growing up in a white area. I can't speak an Asian language, and you know, there are some things about Asian, especially Chinese culture, that I don't know. And there's definitely areas of which I can learn and improve, but just kind of the feeling of not being Asian enough is definitely internalized. Right now, with hate crimes against Asian people going up, it's just really sad and disheartening. And there are times when you just feel so helpless, but it just feels so hard to do anything because it's such an innate systemic problem. You know, it's just so hard to navigate through. I hope for the future for more diversity and acceptance of different backgrounds and looking different and appreciating where everyone is coming from and the richness of everyone's cultures. And I just really, really hope for that. We've all seen some improvements with Asian representation. I've been listening to some more podcasts focused around being Asian, and it's so nice because growing up you didn't realize that you didn't have it until you had it and realized you didn't have it when you were growing up. So, you know, to All the Boys and The Half of It and Crazy Rich Asians and The Farewell, just different movies and TV shows where there's actually Asian people with lines and they're not caricatures of the nerdy Asian girl or the weird Asian girl. And it's just nice. So for now, this is where I'm at with myself and my Asian identity. I really hoped you heard something that you can relate to or heard something that's new, and definitely continue this conversation. If you want to share anything, please feel free. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video.